Hello. Wasn't March a crazy month? I feel like March was, I shouldn't say crazy. March was a wild month. The astrology of March was on no one's side, I feel, but especially not on the side of the air signs. As a Gemini, I feel like every day was filled with hell, and you might love that for me, depending on what your view of Geminis are. But March was a tough month. I'm glad it's over. Originally, when I started recording this video, it was supposed to be a February reads wrap up, but then February came, March came and went, and now today is actually April 1st. So I wanted to just go through all the books I've read so far this year and give you my thoughts on them. Something to note is that I will be looking down at my Notion, which is where I keep track of my books and my thoughts on my books for right now. I've been trying to stray away from Goodreads. I haven't quite gotten entirely away from it yet, but if you have any recommendations on any other apps to use, I've heard Storygraph, but I'm not so thrilled with the Storygraph interface. That could just be me, but any tips and tricks on how to track your books, I'm all ears. But I am enjoying Notion as a whole. I've been doing my budget on Notion. I've been doing my content planning on Notion. For now, it works. So this is my first BookTube video, so I do want to make a disclaimer. I don't rate books on a scale. Why is that? To make an extremely long explanation short, I'm neurodivergent. Keeping a number-based rating or a star-based rating or literally anything of all the books I read is just too much for my brain to maintain. It takes me a long time as it is to process books. I'm a delayed processor. So like, for example, I read this book last year called Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro, and at the time I was reading it, I didn't know how much I was enjoying it, if that makes sense. I kind of flew through the book. When I finished it, I was like, meh. But then I sat on it for a few days, and I was like, I think that was one of my favorite books that I've ever read. So that is to say, all the books I'm going to talk about today, with the exception of the very last one, I've had multiple days to sort of process. And the last one I'm actually excited to talk about because I didn't even need multiple days to process that I liked it, which is how I know that it's a fantastic book. So without further ado, let's get into the book. So going into my stuff here. So I'm 3 books ahead of schedule. I am aiming to read 40 books this year, and I've read 12 so far. So I'm really proud of myself for that. The first book I read this year was My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh. This book was well written. I enjoyed the juxtaposition of the 2 main characters having like very opposite views and outlooks on life. I enjoyed what the author did with that, but something about this book I did not like, and I'll tell you exactly what it is. It's the ending. This book ended on such an awkward note for me. I don't think the author was accomplishing what she wanted to accomplish with it. I don't want to give any spoilers, but being a native New Yorker, I don't know. The ending just left me kind of feeling like underwhelmed, I guess would be the best way to describe it. This book is about a girl who loses both her parents and along her grief journey kind of loses touch with reality and then intentionally decides that she is going to quit her job in a very dramatic way, start to go see a psychiatrist who prescribes pretty much any sleeping pill under the sun to this character. And then she decides that she is going to take this medication and sleep all day, every day, for a year. Hence, My Year of Rest and Relaxation. Again, this is one of those books where I don't think you're supposed to really get the warm and fuzzies for the main character. I found the main character very unlikable, actually, which I think is interesting in its own right. The book was definitely interesting. I just think in terms of the ending, wasn't a fan. And I remember being like very underwhelmed that it was my first book of the year. Next book I read, I'll be really quick about this, Tender is the Night by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I have no idea why I wanted to read this. I wanted to read, I guess, like more classic authors. I haven't read The Great Gatsby since like the 5th grade, but I said, let me give Tender is the Night a shot, which is basically like, it gives White Lotus vibes. It's this rich couple who has like all these family secrets and drama unfolding in the French Riviera when they're on vacation. That's pretty much all I got from it. There's also a lot of racism in this book, with which the intro to the book said was like a justified and inextricable part of the book, but I didn't see that. I didn't see why it was necessary. So that was another book where I was like, meh. Additionally, I will admit, it was hard for me to understand what was going on in the book. Something about the language, I don't know. But this was one of those books that I just sort of powered through because I don't have the ability to not finish a book once I pick it up, which I don't know is a good thing or not. I know Newly Nova on here shares in my affliction where we have to finish books once we start them. The third book I read this year was Babel by R.F. Kuang, and this book, as you could see, got a lot of love from me. I have my degree in European history, so this book was absolutely a joy. I don't know if joy is the right word. This is a fantastical historical fiction, but it feels a little even weird to call it fiction because a lot of R.F. Kuang's material for this book is based off of real events that happened during British colonialism. The Sepoy Rebellion and the Opium Wars are two of the main ones, I think. But this book was written beautifully. The prose was fantastic. It was well researched. It was a really fully realized idea and concept. And additionally, it tells such an important message about the dangers of colonialism and the ways that it impacted communities of color and still does to this day. I think that this should be required reading in schools. I really do. But unfortunately, I do think it's on a banned book list, which should be all the more reason to read it if you haven't already. Babel follows a young boy named Robin Swift, who is originally from China, who comes to London or is brought to London by a professor who works at the esteemed language academy Babel. In this universe that R.F. Kuang has created, silverworking is the main commodity of the empire. So they use silver for everything from healing illnesses to powering up transportation. And the way that this works is through translation of language. I don't want to give too much more away, but this book is a masterpiece, truly. A masterpiece. I loved it so much. It was my first R.F. Kuang book and definitely not my last. I've pre-ordered Catabasis, and I definitely want to read the Poppy War series, but I feel like Babel kind of revived me after two books that I felt very lukewarm about. Babel might even still be my favorite read so far this year. Next one was super short because Babel was very long. I love Japanese fiction. This book was actually a recommendation from Willow Talks Books here on YouTube. I actually have it right here also. This is Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This follows a 30-something girl named Keiko Furukura who is autistic coded character. I forget if she's actually diagnosed in the book or not, but she works at a convenience store. She's a 30-something-year-old woman who works as I believe a part-timer at a convenience store. And it's just her experience with this job and how it kind of serves as a medium for her to interact with society. She talks a lot about some common neurodivergent experiences, which is like, she talks about taking on the mannerisms and tone and expressions of the people who work alongside her in the shop. She talks about the interaction she has at the convenience store being very easy because they're like scripted conversations that she can follow. She talks about the rhythmic and repetitive nature of the job being very comforting to her. And of course, within society, she is considered weird or other for being into her mid-30s and still holding a job at a convenience store. But she doesn't necessarily mind this. She likes looking at the world through the eyes of the konbini. I thought this was a really great book. It was short, it was sweet. I could really relate to the main character a lot as a neurodivergent person, a lot of the experiences she was describing. And it was good. It was a solid book. So I really enjoyed that one as well. The next book is James by Percival Everett, which is the Barnes & Noble Book of the Year for 2024. This book is the retelling of the literary fictional classic The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. So it felt very relevant to start off Black History Month with this book. But just a reminder that we should be learning and celebrating Black history all year round. But it just felt particularly important this year. I really enjoyed this book. It was an extremely quick yet powerful read. The prose was lovely and the story was moving. It's an important message about Black people, particularly within the context of our flawed American history, reclaiming their stories. So I really enjoyed that. I can definitely see why it was Book of the Year at Barnes & Noble. The one thing was the book was broken into 3 parts. I don't have an intelligent reason for why this may be. Maybe someone else does. But to me, it just felt like the book was unnecessarily broken up, and it didn't need to be. Like, it could have all just been one fluid part. But like I said, there could be a more intelligent reason to that I'm not picking up on. So, but absolutely would recommend that anyone read. Next book is The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie. This is based on the Korean folktale, The Tale of Shim-chong. The story originally tells the tale of a daughter who sacrifices herself to the sea god to help her blind father regain his sight, only to be rewarded for this selfless act and return to the land. This retelling is charming. It definitely did give Studio Ghibli vibes. I just so happened to be reading this book during the inauguration of He Who Shall Not Be Named on this channel. So to be honest, a lot of this book I don't remember. Something I do remember though is that I did really enjoy the way that Axie described and set the scenery in the book. It was so descriptive and wonderful, and you could see in your head the scene that she was painting, which I think is really difficult for any author to do, let alone an author as young as Axie. I don't believe Axie is very old at all. I think she may still be college age. I could be wrong, but I just remember thinking that was really talent, and that was really something that I enjoyed about the book, even though I felt mostly meh about it. Don't think it's necessarily fair to say that given the circumstances, but here we are. All right. Next book was Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. This was my first Sally Rooney book. And what a ride. Intermezzo follows 2 estranged brothers, Ivan and Charlie, as they navigate the grief immediately following their father's death. This book was really well written. I really liked the chapters switching between perspectives of the brothers, where Ivan's chapters were longer, more drawn out, and more sophisticated prose, I would say. Charlie's chapters were shorter, more scattered, almost like stream of consciousness writing. I think it did a really good job of showing the mental state of both characters. I really enjoyed this book for that, the characterization. You really felt like you knew Ivan and Charlie as real people. My one thing is that this book was quite long. Rooney keeps revealing these things about the characters that you think she's going to go into more detail about, but she doesn't. And she definitely had the space to do so with this book being nearly 500 pages long. So I just think that this book would have been stronger for me if it were shorter. That is to say, I really did enjoy it. I did. It was just a little too long and drawn out, in my opinion. Next book I read is The Giver by Lois Lowry. Again, really wanting to read more banned books this year, get more familiarized with some of the classics. This is a classic, and again, for good reason. It's short, it's sweet, and it's powerful. It packs a punch. For me, the main point of this story was about the dangers of assimilation in society, the dangers of sameness, the dangers of not valuing independence and autonomy in a larger society. I wanted to read this again, just to kind of get more familiarized with what books they're banning these days. But for me, the part of this book that packed the most punch for me actually was right after the end, which is an ending that is open to interpretation. So I don't want to give anything away, but the afterword by Lois Lowry, the author, I really enjoyed the afterword. I don't read the afterwords of every book, but this one I did because it was such a short book. And she describes her own experiences traveling the world as being sort of the impetus for the idea for this book. And I loved that. I thought it was awesome. Started off March with Strange Pictures by Uketsu, which I also have right here. So this is a book by an anonymous Japanese author who has an anonymous YouTube channel. I don't know much about that, but this is a Japanese horror book of short stories that all involve kind of like a puzzle or a mystery involving pictures. All the stories do eventually end up connecting at the end. I really enjoyed this book. It wasn't scary horror, it was more disturbing horror. So if you have aversions to like body horror and things like that, I might avoid this book. But I had to see what the fuss was about. I think this recommendation I also got from Willow Talks Books, but I enjoyed it. It was good. It was kind of funky, different, and a good way to start off the month. The next book I read after Strange Pictures is another banned book, I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman. This was an extremely powerful book. It's post-apocalyptic sci-fi, speculative fiction. I don't know, but I'll read you the back of the book. Deep underground, 39 women live imprisoned in a cage. Watched over by guards, the women have no memory of how they got there, no notion of time, and only a vague recollection of their lives before. As the burn of electric light merges day into night and numberless years pass, a young girl, the 40th prisoner, sits alone and outcast in the corner. Soon she will show herself to be the key to the others' escape and survival in the strange world that awaits them above ground. So, this book was also extremely powerful. It brings these really like meta concepts to life in a really short amount of pages. Like, if it were the end of the world, what purpose do we find in living? How do we define humanity? How do we extract significance from our existence, even in the most dire end of the world circumstances? I thought it was a really great book. I really enjoyed it. I don't have any major notes on that one. I Who Have Never Known Men. When I was purchasing it, the person at the register told me it was one of the best books they've ever read in their life. And I can definitely see how it would be impactful like that. Don't know if it was one of my favorite books I've ever read in my life, but it was definitely really good. All right. 2 more. All right. The next book I read, Watermoon by Stephanie Sotto Yambao, I think is how you pronounce. I looked it up the other day, so I think that's how you pronounce her last name. She's from the Philippines. Watermoon. Oh my gosh. Watermoon, I feel like, is everything that I kind of wanted from The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea. It was elite Studio Ghibli vibes. Essentially, it's got a little bit of a otherworld, time travel elements to it. So it's a little hard to like put the plot into words. I would say definitely just read it, especially if you're a Studio Ghibli fan and you are looking for those cozy fantasy vibes. But this book was one of the, probably since Babel, back in January, reading this, it was like I couldn't put it down. I kept needing to find out what was going to happen next. There were definitely some elements of it that weren't completely fleshed out, but when you're building a fantasy world in one book, I think that's kind of par for the course. Like, that's bound to happen. But for the most part, I found this to be an extremely sweet story about being in charge of your own destiny and being in charge of your own life choices. And the last book I read for the quarter, so the first 3 months of the year, this is an author that I'm revisiting after reading them for the first time last year. I read Breasts and Eggs by Mieko Kawakami last year and really remember super enjoying her writing style. I just finished yesterday another book by her, way shorter than Breasts and Eggs, but All the Lovers in the Night. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. I finished that book practically in one sitting, it felt like. Under 24 hours, I was done with that book. And I would just like to actually read you what I put in my little daily journal about it. All the Lovers in the Night by Mieko Kawakami, a 30-something proofreader, quits her corporate job to do full-time freelance and becomes dependent on alcohol for a short time and falls in love with an inappropriately older man. That's kind of like the loose plot. Mieko Kawakami doesn't really have like really fast moving plots in her books, I notice. She has a unique prose that captures you in its simplicity, but is at the same time striking in its depth of expression of some of the most intimate and hard to quantify human emotions. So it's that's what I wrote. It's so good. It's I cannot explain it. You just have to read it. You just have to read the magic, you know? Every now and then an author comes along that I say I will read everything they write, and Mieko Kawakami is most definitely one of those authors, and it's been solidified by this book, All the Lovers in the Night. I recommend you check it out. So a lot of Japanese fiction in this roundup. I'm sure there'll be tons more, but that was it. That was everything that I've read so far this quarter. I have a ton more books to read this year and a goal of hitting at least 40 books. We're 3 books ahead of schedule, so maybe we'll get even more than that. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll stick around, like, subscribe for more videos in the future. We can talk books together. Avocado. I just love her. She smells so good.